Okay, let's get started here. My name is Terry Howald. I'm here to talk about FreeCAD. Do we have any FreeCAD users here? Do we have any people that would consider themselves sort of expert, really experienced FreeCAD users? Oh, rats. I was going to pull them up here to do the talk instead of me. They can even use my slides. But okay, well, so why do I want to talk about FreeCAD? Well, every once in a while I'll have a project that I want to do that requires maybe some machining, or I have a friend who has a 3D printer that eventually I plan to take advantage of at his cost. And so the other thing is I attend the Midwest RepRap Festival in Goshen, Indiana, and that's in the springtime. It's usually in late March or early April. And if you don't know about this, it's sort of a homegrown event where people show off what they do with their 3D printers. And it's actually very impressive to see what people make. And every year I've gone to that, I look at stuff and I think, well, I want to build that, or I want to make that. And I just, we're busy and we have other things that take precedence, and I never seem to get around to it. But this has been an incentive for me. I have done some 3D modeling in the past, and so seeing what people do has been kind of a motivation for me. And so I had to learn a little more about, okay, so how are they actually making their 3D printed objects? And they're using something to make a 3D model. Either they're going to get a 3D model from places like Thingiverse, and I guess there are probably a number of websites that host places where people will upload their... Did that happen in the last talk, by the way? People that were... Did that blink on and off? Or... Okay, well, it came back on, so I guess we'll keep going. I remember last year doing it, in somebody's talk, it just kept doing that. And but it's fine on my screen, so I'm not sure. Anyways, I'll just continue. So, right, so what they do, right? So people build these 3D models, either go get one from somewhere, or they'll make it themselves, and they have to convert it to a specific file format that 3D printers understand. And that's this, you see this STL format. So there are a number of ways that people are creating 3D models, and then there's sort of a standard way in which it gets printed. So anyways, I mentioned Thingiverse. If you don't know what that is, that's just a website where, when you can see it, people actually go to and download, or you can host 3D models up there and download and just print them. I downloaded a couple just to see what the file formats are, and they typically will be in some 3D model format like OBJ, and then there will be an STL file, which is, again, something that a 3D printer would understand. So you can take those models directly, and if you have a 3D printer and you know how to do this stuff, you can run with it. So if you're interested in creating something, most likely you're not just going to find a model of what you want. You're probably going to have to make it. And in the open source world, Blender has been around for a long time. I'm thinking I was using it 15 years ago. If I think back, 2006, if my math is right. I had used Blender for a project then, back when I was goofing around with amateur filmmaking. And so it's been around a long time. It is a really good tool for people interested in getting into making 3D models. It is actually now, with the release of Blender 2.8, it's a serious production tool. Visual effects houses are putting money into Blender to build tools that they want so they can use Blender in their workflow now. So it has money behind it, and a very strong foundation, and a very strong following, with lots of users and lots of tutorials. Tutorials are very easy to find. And so that was my first thought, is that, well, I'll just, I've used Blender in the past. It had an obscure user interface, so that was a little harder. That's all changed now with Blender 2.8. They've modernized their user interface, and that has come from the feedback they've gotten from the visual effects world that is serious about using Blender now. Is that the right choice? Yes, question? Yeah, Blender has, the question is, have I ever used their CAD plugin? And Blender has, it's one of the nice things about it is it's extendable. And yes, it has a lot of plugins. I have not used their CAD plugin. I'll basically have to relearn Blender 2.8 because I had learned the old Blender with the obscure user interface. And so now I have to go back and relearn how it actually works the way it should have worked if you're used to working with visual effects tools and modeling tools from other products. Then now Blender will make more sense. But no, I haven't. And there's a plugin as well for 3D printing. But I haven't used that either. Any other questions while we're... Oh. So, of course, Blender is not the only choice for 3D modeling. There are lots of choices. And I always come across FreeCAD over the years, never really taken a serious look at it before. So I thought, you know what, let's just I'll spend some time, take a look at FreeCAD and see what try to understand, why would I choose one over the other? Why would I use Blender or FreeCAD or something else? And in FreeCAD, it's a 3D modeling tool. It has a different focus than Blender, and I'll talk a little bit about that in my next slide here. But let me just take a drink here. So that Blender and FreeCAD are actually fundamentally different in that Blender is a direct modeler. So in Blender, when you build models, you're working directly with a mesh. And you can think of a mesh as a shell that you're constructing to represent your 3D object. And that shell won't have mass or volume simulated as part of its mathematical model. And it's very good for organic designs. And so that's why you see people making 3D animations of characters of, a lot of you, if you know Blender, you've probably heard of Big Buck Bunny and other short projects that the Blender Foundation has sponsored to help get the word out on that Blender is a serious tool for visual effects and 3D animations and stuff. And that's what it's mostly used for, is creating 3D animations. FreeCAD and other CAD type tools are what you would call a parametric modeler instead of a direct modeler. And it represents objects instead of a mesh as something that's called a solid model. And it's a model that will represent things like volume and having mass and volume for advanced users that do simulations. It's more appropriate for geometric designs as opposed to organic designs. And it's primarily used for modeling technical parts. Whereas with Blender, your goal is to create this animation, which would be a video or movie or whatever. And with FreeCAD, your goal would be to create a model of some technical part that you're going to have manufactured. Say either 3D printed, or in the case, I work for a company that builds a lot of their own stuff. We do motion control products, so we build sliders and camera rigs, and we have mechanical engineers that use SolidWorks for designing parts, and then they spit some file format out that CNC machines know how to use. And so I see these technical drawings, these mechanical drawings laying around where the mechanical engineers work. I'm actually a software engineer, and anymore I do more software testing than anything else. But I see these printouts of mechanical parts, and that's the kind of thing that FreeCAD would be used for. And so I thought, okay, I know nothing about that. I do have some understanding of Blender because I had tried to integrate visual effects that I had modeled in the past in a very, very bad amateur horror movie that I made And but I have some understanding of that. The FreeCAD stuff, parametric, modeler, I mean, it says right away, you go to the FreeCAD website and you see this, your own 3D parametric modeler. I have no idea what that meant. Okay, I know what 3D modeling is, but why are you saying on your front page, the first thing that I see when I go to your website, why are you saying parametric? And so I thought, okay, one of the reasons why I do these things is to get myself out of my comfort zone, because that's the only way I can force myself to learn something new. So I thought, okay, pretty sure I can do the 3D printing stuff with Blender. I'm going to put that aside for now, unless I'm going to spend some months and try to learn FreeCAD and see where I can go with that. And so, my first step is, well, I got to understand what this parametric modeler thing means. And really, all it does is these type of models will have parameters that determine the size and shape. And you can change these parameters at any time. And you'll see that when I do a few demonstrations, that in order for me to change the model, like in Blender, you would just change the mesh. And in a CAD program like FreeCAD, you go in and you change the parameters that represent the model. And not only can you, I saw some wiki of some type that when I was trying to figure out what parametric modeler or modeling means, I saw it referenced as history modeling. And so the idea is that you can go back into your design at any point, change one of these parameters, and it would be reflected in the model. So I said, okay, well, I'm starting to, yeah, question?
So it's kind of like the aspect of using like vector art where you can use nodes and points and be able to resize it without having to worry about it.
Yes, that's true. The comment was pointing out that it's like if you've ever used Inkscape, it's a vector-based graphics, and you can go change your graphics at any time by changing the parameters. So, and actually with Inkscape, their SVG format is supported by FreeCAD, so people will do 2D designs in Inkscape and then import that into FreeCAD. So they work well together. Anyone else? Yeah, question here.
This might be a little bit later on, but does this produce any like G-code?
The question is, does it produce G-code? And please correct me if I'm wrong, G-code is what a CNC machine uses. Yeah, so when if you want to have a metal part made, and this is what they do at my company that I have no idea, since we've got experts for that, and they just consider me a bit twiddler. But you construct your 3D model in something like SolidWorks, and instead of saving it in a file like an STL format, which is something that a 3D printer would understand, it gets saved in something called G-code, and I think it's like a scripting language. Is that a? Oh, well, yeah. So 3D printers use G-code as well. Okay. Okay, so.
What you talked about is CAM as opposed to CAD. So CAD is the design aspect, which is what this does. CAM does the G-code stuff.
Okay. So this will only just do the design then and not
Going through the STL and then something else will press the STL to do that. That's how it usually works on a 3D printer.
Right, so. Yeah, that's basically an output of producing the 3D model. And see, I'm just learning more and more about this stuff. Okay, so, great. So, one more question? The question is, can you do physics simulation with FreeCAD? And I'm not sure. There are a lot of workspaces in FreeCAD, as I'll show, that I haven't explored. So I'm not sure. Does anybody know the answer to that?
I don't believe there's things called like a finite element, not finite element, might be finite element analysis, where there's essentially takes your model and turns it into a whole pile of mesh of individual components that can model and determine like there will be a lot of strain on this part and not much on here. FreeCAD will do it, but if you look up element analysis and CAD, you'll find it.
So if you couldn't hear the answer to that, the quick answer is no, FreeCAD doesn't have that kind of functionality. I know SolidWorks, because I know our mechanical engineers at a company do it, but that's, very high end, very expensive. And really this is, I don't know if FreeCAD is a production quality modeler, but for hobbyists and stuff, I think it's perfectly fine. And at least for my purposes, it's been fine. So, okay, so moving on. Okay, so the question is all right, I figured out I'm going to use FreeCAD. Where do I run it on? Of course, this is a Linux conference, right? So naturally, I do everything I can, I do on Linux. Unfortunately, in my job, I also have to support Windows applications and Mac OS applications and iPad applications, so I'm kind of stuck with that. If I could do everything, and my dream is to only have to deal with Linux the rest of my life, but I can't seem to get there. So I have the latest Ubuntu running, and I like it a lot. I'm actually running the BOF tonight for Ubuntu, where I'm going to show you how I use it, and I'm curious to see what others. So if you're an Ubuntu user, we'll have a birds of feather tonight. It took me a while to figure out how to pronounce Ian Ermine, but it's I guess that roughly translates into morning weasel, which I kind of thought was funny. And I've liked the artwork on the desktop from previous mascots, but I kind of feel like I'm being watched every time I start up my laptop. Kind of looking at me, and all I can think is, yeah, he's a weasel. Moving on, where do you get FreeCAD? If you go to their website, they'll have Windows, Mac, and Linux versions, but it's the Linux version is an app image. Do you understand what app image means when it comes to? Yeah, it's basically an app image is an executable that has all the libraries included in the executable, and it makes the application a little easier to be cross Linux platforms, as opposed to which I prefer, which would be just to do it a binary package install. And the reason why I prefer the binary package install is because if you look over here on the dock, I have my favorites. I've got FreeCAD over there. I don't know how well that shows up over there. With app image, there's no easy way to integrate the favorite into the dock. I Google searched a number of times and found maybe some third-party things that would do that, but it looked hard, and I only looked like the first or second returns from the search, and beyond that, that's too hard. And I'm sorry, what?
There's a few Unity files you can paste in to add it, like .dsp files to add it.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a way to do it, but if I'm just installing a program and I want it to work, it just sounds like more work than so with the app image, you just download the image into some folder wherever you want and just double click and it'll run and it'll be fine. And there's nothing wrong with it. When I install a binary package, it's just easier for me to add it to the dock and away I go. So you start up FreeCAD and there will be help and stuff. And I'll just start it up here. And you might ask, what resources does it require? Well, it's a little hard for me to answer that. I'm running on a laptop that's at least 8 years old here, but I've put in as much memory as it'll take. I've put in a solid-state drive, so it's even though it's an old laptop, it still works pretty well for this kind of thing. You'll notice when you start FreeCAD, there's a lot of useful help here if you have the patience to read. Sometimes I don't. FreeCAD is all about these workbenches. So you see right up front, they have these different documentation for their different workbenches. And that can be a little intimidating because I look at this and I thought, well, I just want to use the program. Which workbench do I start with? So I found that a little, it put me off a little because I didn't quite know how to get started. So then I went to YouTube and watched some YouTube videos on how to get started with FreeCAD, and that was helpful just to point me in a direction of which workbenches should I start with, and then just ignore the rest. don't worry about the architecture workbench or the robot workbench, and you can learn about those things later. The important thing is just try to find something to get started with, so you can start learning. One thing I did notice is that this drop down here allows you to change workbenches, and if you close the start window like I did, if you go back to the start workbench down here, see, it just brings back the help like when you started it up. Let me go back to my slides here so you see where I'm at.
Can you use different workbenches within the same project?
Yes, you can. Yeah, that's good. The question was, can you use different workbenches in the same project? And the answer is yes. So, I mentioned Thingiverse models. One of the things I did is I thought, okay, we'll actually bring that back. Before you can do anything in FreeCAD, you have to create a new document, and then I can go import. And the first thing I thought is, well, can I import one of these, a model that I had downloaded? So this particular model had an OBJ file, which I'm not sure what produces that, but I know what the STL is. So I opened that up, and it pulls in, the model that somebody had exported and put up on Thingiverse. And what I would recommend if you're interested in learning this kind of tool, the first thing you really need to do is get comfortable with navigating your model and how to move your model around and show it. And because I spend a lot of my time just trying to look at the thing. And once you become comfortable, with moving it around and stuff, then that really helps a lot. Your question was, what does it look like?
Yeah, can you see the actual ring commands of what making the mesh?
Are you asking, can you see the mesh?
No, I mean, how do you actually view the parameters for it?
Well, for this particular model, I don't know the answer to that, because it's basically whatever was used to create the model. When it's saved as an STL file, you're basically throwing away all the history information, right? And it's just put into a file format. It's like rendering an image from a 3D model. You've rendered out this file, which is for printing, so you really can't go back and look at the history of it. What you can look at is you can look at the mesh. So if you go to this tool here, right, and then you can actually go in and look at the mesh. Now, you can see my slower laptop, it's a little slow with that, but you zoom in far enough and you actually see the mesh.
There is a reverse engineering tab, which might actually help you actually get to the point where you can do that, but that's the best you're going to get from an STL.
So you can't do something like if it's made out of cylinders or things, what the actual structure. Sorry, if it's made of cylinders and things like that, you can't deal with the original structure for defining it.
After it's in the STL, it's no longer cylinder. It's just the outer surface.
Yeah, it's basically a shell now. It no longer has the history of how it was created.
You have no way of knowing if it's a cylinder or a 20-sided object if it rendered it with 20 sides. So, it gets complicated.
Okay, so moving on. So what I recommend, if you're new to this and you're just curious, pull in a 3D model and start playing with the navigational tools. Like you see these toolbars up here. Hopefully you can see my mouse. All right, it's just these tools are just for quickly moving around. And this thing here in the right-hand corner is just, again, it's to help you navigate and get comfortable with looking at your object in 3D space. And there's also commands that if I hold down, the middle mouse key, I can do stuff like this. And if I hold in the shift and middle mouse key, I can move things around. And it'll zoom from the point wherever your mouse is. So if I want to zoom from the center, see, I can, by using the wheel mouse, I can scroll in and out. And all that is configurable. And the reason why I was immediately able to navigate 3D space with FreeCAD, sorry, right away is because I set it up with the navigational style to be like Blender, which I already knew. So if you know some 3D modeling tool, you might be able to choose the same navigational style, and that'll help you right away start to use, to be able to look around at what you're working on. So any questions on that before I, oops, I hit the close button. Or did I? Yeah, we'll close that out.
I'm gonna assume it emulates the old style Blender interface.
I'm sorry, the old style what?
I assume it emulates pre 2.8 Blender.
Did that change for 2.8?
Well, I'm just saying like 2.8 changed a lot of like the interface and the hotkeys.
Right, yeah. The user interface did change how you use the shift and right mouse or the mouse wheel. See, I can't even tell you what the combinations are because my muscle memory remembers how. But no, that didn't change for Blender 2.8. So what's the best way to get started? And the best way is to go to the Parke workbench with FreeCAD. And what the Parke workbench has is primitive models of, say, a circle or square or something, and you can start working with it that way. So if I go back here and start up my FreeCAD again, that gives me an excuse to take a drink. All right, so I'll close out the start page and bring up a new document and go down to the Parke workbench. Then you can see these fundamental shapes, or primitive shapes is actually the right word. See, and then I can start putting these on here and start to work with them. One thing I noticed by accident is if I go back to the draft workbench and then back to the Parke workbench, I don't know if this is a bug or if they meant to do it, it puts down a ground plane, which I actually like because before I kind of feel like the object is just floating in space. And if you've ever worked in Blender, Blender has that same kind of plane by default. So it's kind of how I was used to before when I would try to model things in Blender. So I thought, well, I don't know if it's meant to be there, but I go ahead and put it in anyway. And then, so we'll put on another shape here. And it drops them into what it considers like the center point, the 0, 0, 0 point by default. And then there are ways that you can start to move this around. Like if I right mouse click and it says transform, see how it puts these arrows on there? All right, oops. I can actually drag that and start to move it around. Sorry, I usually, I work, when I do this, I do it on a larger computer screen. So it's a little challenging on my laptop, but it probably shows up better in there and gets a smaller screen. Right, and then another way you can move things around is if you just click on the data, and if you look over here, you see there's a dot. Right, click on that, and there's this, I'll pull this out a little bit, and you can see there are parameters here that you can specify to where it is located. And so the question is, how useful is that? And it turns out, just working with these primitives is very useful to me because I had a specific project, and I'll show that. Let me start this up again, where I wanted to make these things out of metal because and actually, I did a talk here 2 years ago about a summer project I did where I wanted to make a high temperature superconductor. And one of the things you need to do is, once you mix up the chemicals, you get this powder form, and it's easier to work as a disk. So I wanted to press that into a disk. And so at my workplace, we have hydraulic presses, and I thought, well, if I just had a thingy with another thingy, and somebody said, no, what you want is a punch and a die, and then I could, put this powder in and then go into my workplace and, like I'm gambling in Las Vegas, although you don't pull the crank anymore, make these disks. And so thought, all right, well, don't really want to bug my boss to get the machinist at work. But fortunately, I had a friend whose father-in-law was a retired machinist, and he basically had a garage that was a full machine shop. And I thought, okay, I'll draw these. My first thought is I'll make a 3D model in FreeCAD now, and we'll give the mechanical drawing to this friend of mine's father-in-law, and he'll know what to do. And of course, I did the usual like I always do, which is come up with this great idea and then tell myself I don't have time to figure it out, and I ended up drawing it on a piece of paper. And this is the end result. So it worked out fine. But we can actually make these in FreeCAD. I could have done this if I had the confidence to just spend a day. I probably could have cranked it out. Okay. Yeah, well, I'm a low budget operation, so yeah, I spare every expense. So how do you get started? Again, you open your FreeCAD and you close the start page and you create a document. And in this case, I go to the part workbench because I want to work with these primitive parts. So, right, if you remember from my picture, those were cylinders. So we'll create a cylinder here. And again, we'll just start to look at it here in 3D space a little and do my little trick here to bring back in the ground plane just so I feel grounded, like I'm not floating in space. And I had specific measurements when I made these things, but for this demonstration, it almost might be easier if I sit, if you don't mind. There we go. For this demonstration, the measurements aren't so important. Like if you look down in this left-hand panel here, you see the radius is 2 millimeters and height is 10. That's fine for these purposes. So the first thing was that die. So it was like a cylinder within a cylinder. So the first cylinder, we'll give it a little larger. Say we can call that 5. So this is parametric modeling, right? I've got this model and it's being specified by parameters. And by changing the parameters, I change the model. And so next, we'll put another cylinder, right, in this cylinder like this. I notice that I do a lot of software testing, so whenever I add a new model, it changes the view back to some default size. I would call that a bug, and I would submit that to the developers and say, when I put another object in my view here, I don't want it to change. And maybe that's configurable in FreeCAD. I honestly don't know. But you notice when I added the model in, it like zoomed out. And I would have logged that as a bug. But okay, so with these primitive tools that are provided with the Parke workbench, if I select, see I've got the cylinder selected, and I select this cylinder 001 by holding down the control key and clicking, I can use Boolean operations to add or subtract. And in this case, I want to subtract. And see, all of a sudden, that looks like the die that I had shown in the picture. And then again, we can fuse those. Do I want to do that? What do I want to do? Oh, we'll just leave it like that. Transform, and then I can just sort of move this off the center point. Because the next primitive that I add to the design will get put at the center point. So that cut, it combines them into one object? Yeah. If you look over here on the left-hand side again, under application and unnamed, that's basically the file name. So if I save it and give it a file name, that will show up there. And you see where it says cut? That is what our new object is called. Of course, we can rename it if we want. But if you click on the arrow, you see the components of the cut. Not only can you see them, but you can modify them. Yeah, question?
Blender has a mirroring tool. Can you define symmetry in a similar way, like radial symmetry with this?
the part design workbench is for making more complicated parts, and that will have a mirror. The question is there a mirror function? And the answer is yes. In the more advanced part design workbench, which I don't know if I'll get to. I did have a demo part for the advanced part design, but I'm blowing through my time here faster than I thought. So we'll keep plugging it away here. But what I wanted to show is that, yes, we've made this cut, but it's not permanent, and we can actually change the cylinders even though they've been submitted to this Boolean cut operation. And so which one do I want to change? So the inner cylinder is 2 millimeters, and I can go in and change that to 3. And you notice it didn't update right away, but if you see up here, this redraw, it'll recompute. And then, again, that's what parametric modeling means. Not only is the design driven by parameters, but you can go back in the history of that design and change the parameters. So I think I'm starting to understand what parametric modeling means. Yes? The question is, can you get a printout of the parameters? And I don't know exactly because I haven't tried, but it seems like something that, do we have any FreeCAD users that know the answer to that? Right, so in this combo view down, I'll scroll up a little. There is, under the data, it shows you the parameters. I haven't tried to answer that question, so I don't know the answer. I thought maybe we'd have some FreeCAD expert here that would. It seems like you should be able to. It's a reasonable thing to do. That's why I put, because I'm a newbie too, because then whenever I don't know, I can just, well, I'm new to this. Okay, so let's add in another part. Again, see, it zoomed in on me, so we'll push it back out. And in this case, for the case of my die, it was really 2 pieces. It was a cylinder and then with a piece on the bottom. And we can, we'll add in a second cylinder here. So now I've got these 2 cylinders to work with. Can't see them because they're one on top of the other. But I know, what did I make this, 5? I think I made that 5. So we'll make one of them 5 millimeters, like this. All right, and then we'll make it, which one is that? Let's make this a lot shorter, like 2. And we'll make it down to 1. Right, and the other one, I guess we just, no, it's got to be shorter too. So we'll make that down to like, yeah, that'll be fine. All right, so that's basically the die part that I had wanted created. And just by messing with primitives, right, I could have modeled that, and I think then there was one more piece to it, right? There was it was just the punch part. Oops, wrong. Yeah, it was just the punch part, which again is just a cylinder. So even with just using primitives, I could have done something that I would have found useful and kind of fun to put together. But how would I show that? Say, okay, great, I've made these designs. How am I going to show them to this person in his garage, his machine shop? Do I carry my laptop and I just say, hey, look at my screen? And the answer is no. You can actually create a mechanical drawing. Now, this drawing function, this drawing workbench is on its way out. It's basically obsolete, and now they're using TechDraw instead. So we've created this.
Was it ever going to make that feature actually work?
Which one?
The one that you said that was obsolete.
No, because it works now, but the project people running the project are putting their efforts into the tech draw as the future of creating mechanical drawings, and the drawing part they're going to sweep out the door. So now let's see where I am. Do I want a default page? So that I can create this default drawing page, which then I can add views of my parts. And it's pretty easy to do, right? I just go, say I want, I don't know if you can see the tooltips very well on there, but this one says insert view into page. So I can just click on it, and the view of my part shows up in the report. And it's small because it's to scale. So it was, FreeCAD knows that that thing was like, what, 5 millimeters in diameter or in radius. So to make it useful on the page, I can actually scale it up. So let's just scale it up, say, by 5. So we'll say 5. And then it didn't scale right away, so I know I got to do this recompute thing. And then my part shows up, and it'll be, a nice size on the page for viewing. Not only can I just put views, and by the way, the angle that you see is the angle that the view is. So if I were to change the angle here, then you would see the angle. Oops. There we go. I've done that in my practice talks, so I was prepared. So not only can I just show the part, right, but I can show, I can label the dimensions of the part to make it easier for whoever I'm going to show this that, hey, I want this made. And that's what these tools here are for. So like if I want to, and the way you do this is you click on a dot, and that should have turned some color. I'm legally colorblind, so I can't tell you what color it is, but I know it changed color. And then if I select this vertical looking thing, see, and drag that out, click off the page, you can see it. It's very easy to label dimensions on parts. So I can do the same thing down, say, with this one here and this one here, and choose this horizontal looking thing. It's a distance dimension, it would be the actual title. I can start to build this report that I would want to deliver. And again, the fun thing about this, I think, is that it is, because it's history driven. And so I think so you go through all this work, you put all your views of the parts you want to show somebody, and then you're like, oh, nuts, that was actually supposed to be a different dimension. Well, the nice thing about it is you can go back and change that, right? So remember we clicked on this guy, and we went back into the cut and changed that inner cylinder to, let's make it something that's obvious to see. And that redraws there. And then if we go back to our reports page, again, the redraw shows up there as well. I think I'm going to stop my presentation now because I see hands and stuff. So let me just, we've got about 15 minutes, well, really 5 minutes, right, just stopped. And we'll, let me just go to my last page here. And this was the drawing that mechanical drawing that I was working towards for my presentation. And then I was going to do a 3D part design, another start thing. But I'll end my talk there, and why don't we just field questions for the next few minutes. Yeah, well, let's go with the gentleman right here. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear it. Did I figure out volume? Well, I mean, this is as far as I've taken FreeCAD, so I don't know the answer to that. I mean, if you knew the part, right? If you knew if it was aluminum, right, or steel, you can figure out the volume based on, or the mass based on the volume. But let's go back here. Yes. Yeah, at that point, those can be exported, yeah, as STL files. Way in the back here. There you Yeah. Unfortunately, I've got somebody's moving a cart back behind me, and that's all I can hear. Can louder, please? Automatically preview? The only way I saw is that I have to go back and change the view of that object and then refresh that, recompute the display, and then it would. So maybe there's a way, I don't know. I always had to do it manually, tell it to refresh, like I did here. We're coming around.
I would think that you would probably copy the item itself 3 times and then change the view there and then put it into the textual drawing.
Right, but it seems like that's something easily that you can do for you, right?
Yeah.
There probably is a standardized button that just does that.
I mean, they do is the workflow is that you create a sketch. So you basically choose whether you want to be X, Y, or YZ or XZ plane, and then in that plane you can create a sketch, and then you can once you create that sketch, you can extrude it out and start to build on your object from there.
What do you use your Visco for?
What?
Superconductor? Is that Visco?
The what?
Your superconductor.
Oh, yttrium barium copper oxide. Yeah. It didn't work. I made like 6 of them and none of them ever worked, and it just. However, I think you've got to heat it for like I forget 1,000 degrees Celsius for what is it 12 hours or something, and then you have to bring the temperature down in an oxygen environment, and I could never get it to work right. Yeah. Question over here? Nope. So. There's actually some guy has a really good video on YouTube about he couldn't get it to work either, and he did it in another way. So yeah, it was. I have all that stuff still, so I still could do the pro. Do we have any other questions? Let me off the hook. Easy. What are we doing here? Okay, well we'll call it quits. Right on.